Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new lecture of research methods. In today's lectures, we will be focusing on secondary data. So we will try to understand what we mean with secondary data. We will look at some of the sources of secondary data and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of using secondary data. So when we say secondary data, we mean that those are the information that has been previously gathered for some purpose other than the current research project. So while the primary data is the data which originated by the researcher for the specific purpose of addressing the problem at hand, secondary data, those are the existing data which was collected by you as a researcher or at a time that you conduct your research, but they are also collected for the purposes of a prior study or for other problems rather than your original problems. So primary data, they are collected to answer your own or your original research question. So you as a researcher is very involved in the data collection process, which might cost you higher if you conduct or you need to conduct, for example, interviews or questionnaire than using existing secondary data. So therefore, the collection time for primary data is normally longer than collecting secondary data. So there are different types of secondary data which can be used in research, and you can go back and explore further within Sandro's book. So this include, for example, government surveys, such as the UK Labour Force Survey, the Family Expenditure Survey, the British Crime Survey. Or there are other like government legislation reports, which states the policies and the guidelines. So for example, Department for Health, Department for Work and Pension, or Department for Education. Also, media documents, they can consider as well secondary data. This includes newspapers, magazines, television, radio, or social media. Also, organization, international organization website such as a World Bank, World Health Organization, International Labor Office. Those websites provide data and statistics and publications on different topics, for example, related to global challenges, including poverty, unemployment or employment or economic growth, or, for example, gender inequality. So, for example, this is one of the examples of the websites. So this is the UK National Statistics, which offers official statistics on businesses, industry, employment, labor market, and people and population in the UK. Another example is the EU statistics, Eurostat, and this website provides statistics and data on Europe in many subjects or many aspects, as you can see in their like long list of categories. This is another website for the US Census, which offers statistics about the people and the economy in the US. The website of the World Trade Organization also offers the trade statistics and economic research. MarketLine is one of the websites. It's a company which provides like access to reports and statistics on companies like industries and financial data in different countries. So those are all examples of secondary data sources that can you use in your research depending on your research question. So example of using secondary data in your research, for example, this table is derived from the International Monetary Fund, and it describes the world's largest economies in 2016, 2030, and 2050, of course, projected, and those are measured by the GDP. So here, from this table, you can discuss that China, for example, has the largest economy in the world, and it's expected to stay leading the economy in both 2030 and 2050. However, India is projected to be the second rank, overtaking the US in 2050. Another example of using the secondary data in your research is using such table, which derived from a book called Multicultural Management by Al-Ashmawi and Harris. So this table compares the most important cultural values of the US, Japan, and Arab countries. So as we can see, a close look at this table shows that there is a great deal of differences among these three cultures. So such available secondary data can provide us very valuable information in order to compare like countries or different contexts, as we will discuss later. So social media as well can be a great source of secondary data. So for example, Facebook has more than 2 billion users. And also if we will talk about Twitter, there are around 500 million tweets per day on Twitter and around 200 billion tweets per year. So social media can provide an easy and quick access to data which can be analyzed in order, for example, to understand the behavior or the attitudes of people or customers, or for example, to predict certain aspects such as demand for certain products. So some platforms for example, Facebook, they provide large scale of database, which we might call them big data. So I want you to watch this video, which is around 20 minutes, 20 minutes long. It is a very interesting research which used secondary data. So Jonathan Harris, the researcher, he explored the emotional world of the web. So what he did, he scanned posts from blogs and also images on the internet, so he can explore the feelings and the emotions of humans. So I encourage you to watch this short YouTube video on how one of the researchers which applied secondary data in their research. So there are advantages and disadvantages of using secondary data. So the main obvious advantage is that they are relatively easier to access and to obtain, either through the internet or through the library, or for example, if you are having a company as a case study, you can gain secondary data through the internal company sources or records or report. So this was made much easier with the advancement in technology, where much of these data or secondary data are available freely to access. So they are much cheaper than, for example, collecting primary data, and they can save you not only money, but also they can save you time. Another advantage for secondary data is that they can provide you with valuable information if you want to carry out, let's say, longitudinal studies for example, rather than waiting for several years in order to reach for certain conclusions or to make certain recommendations. You will have the data set available for you, so you can compare let's say certain phenomena over years by looking at the data available now and looking at the data which was collected 10 years ago, for example. So they will enable you to see how this phenomena was progressed or changed over time. Or also secondary data can be useful to compare two different contexts or different countries, as we saw in the previous tables when we saw the cultural differences between three different populations. So secondary data, the availability of secondary data makes it more visible to do such comparison. Also, another advantage is that secondary data can help you to increase the credibility and validity of your research findings by triangulation. So you can use different data collection methods by collecting primary data and also secondary data, which will help you to further explain your research findings and also validate them. So those are the advantages of using secondary data. However, there are also disadvantages of using secondary data. Most importantly is that you need to ensure the relevance of this data to your research. So the original purpose of the secondary data might not actually match your needs, and it might not be relevant to your research purpose, or they might use different measure of your variables. Also, you might have difficulty in accessing these data, so you might need to buy secondary data, which might be expensive, and it might be also more expensive than if you will go and collect those data yourself. On another hand, secondary data may be available, maybe they are relevant to your research topic or a question, but their quality is not high, because like anyone can post anything on the internet, on their blogs, on their websites, so you don't have control over the quality of the data. Or maybe like the data, secondary data, maybe they are still insufficient to answer your research question. So you need to collect primary data in addition to the secondary data. Another disadvantage that the data might be outdated. So for example, the last government census was 5 years ago. So you couldn't rely on such secondary data because like the population or the economic factors or indicators have already changed since that time. So you couldn't use like secondary data in that case. And also another thing that you need to spend much time and effort in order to understand the nature of the study or the structure of the data sets or the relevance of this study to your research. And also you need to evaluate its quality and also its credibility, which will cost you actually time and efforts. So why we use secondary data? So as I mentioned, like for the advantages of that secondary data, both secondary and primary data can help to answer your research question. So you can start with secondary data, which might be helpful or useful to you to save time and cost, and also can provide sufficient information to answer your research question or give further direction. So this is something that you can decide based on your research question and your topic and based on the available secondary data. Also, secondary data can help you to decide your sample. So for example, if there are like, you will studying entrepreneurship in certain country, but there are more entrepreneurs in like the technology sector in 2 certain cities. So instead of focusing on the whole country, you might only focus on those like 2 big cities. You might consider it also like secondary data might shape the questions for your primary research. So, for example, publications on the legal, the economic and social indicators in the country will inform your questions that you might ask your participant, for example, on how these like different factors or indicators, they promote or restrict entrepreneurial activities or entrepreneurial motivation in certain country. Also, secondary data can help you to confer or to explain your findings. So if employment rate in a certain country is low, this might explain why people start a business. This is because due to lack of job opportunities. So there are like many situations that you can use secondary data. And as I said before, this depends mainly on your research question. So you might access data easily and save yourself money and time. However, as I mentioned previously, you need to evaluate the accuracy and also the quality of the secondary data based on different criteria. So first of all, you need to ensure the accuracy of the source of the data, as anyone can write and publish their opinions on the internet. So there is no control, there is no monitoring or on what is published or already on the internet. However, for example, like government organization or a trade organization or like educational institutions such as universities, those are considered relatively reliable sources for secondary data, and you can ensure like their high quality data. However, blogs and other websites, they might publish data that can be biased, or maybe that even the data is fake. So please ensure to know the source of the data and if it is reliable or not before citing them in your research. Another criteria to assess the secondary data is their purpose of study. As I mentioned earlier, that one of the disadvantages of using secondary data is that the data might not be relevant to your research topic or to your research question. Or maybe some studies, they are conducted, sometimes they are conducted to justify a particular position, and this happens usually in advocacy research. So in such cases, the results or the findings may be biased, so you couldn't like rely on such databases. So you need to investigate why the study was conducted and what the sample is. So in this figure, for example, there was a study which conducted by BlogHair, where respondents indicated they spend more time in reading blogs than watching TV or listening to radio or reading newspapers or magazines. However, there is a problem here with the sample. So the sample that was used in this study was primarily like individuals from the BlogHair network itself. So since the respondents are member of the BlogHair network, they like, of course, reading, they like commenting, they like writing blogs, which actually like explains the results that we already see in this table. Hence, there is like a sample bias here, and most of the respondents, we expect that they are females who like blogging. So you need to ensure who the sample is and how it is selected, as these are critically important in determining the accuracy of the secondary data. So in the previous example, the sample was not only part of the BlogHair network, but it also was limited to active social media users. So it's not surprising that to see that 96% of the respondents, they read blogs. So let's say if the sample have included like other users who are like little or not active social media users, then the results would look quite different. Also, the sample was predominantly female, so it would not be like representative of the population as a whole. So for example, if a company wants to use the results of BlogHair as a secondary research study to support their management decision, then the sample needs to represent the company's population or the target market that they are making the decision for. So in this example, it would be difficult for any company other than BlogHair to use this study to make any management decisions. Another aspects in order like to evaluate the accuracy of the secondary data is data collection. So when the study was undertaken, for example, a study which examining what people do on the internet or how they spend their time on the internet today will not be as much valuable as if it was conducted, let's say, 10 years ago. So too much has been changed, like blogging and social networking opportunities have grown rapidly. And also people now, they can watch entire television episodes online, for instance. So you need to ensure also how the data was collected and how the participants were selected, as we just discussed in the previous example of BlogHair. So for example, suppose a survey question ask respondent to indicate their age by checking at a category from among like those choices, like let's say your age less than 18, or is it from 18 to 24, or it is from 25 to 34, or 35 to 44, 45 and older. So when you conduct the analysis, if you report that the average age here is 35 based on this data, this will be inaccurate because means cannot be actually calculated based on the basis of categorical data. Only here you can use counts or percentage that would be more appropriate to report. So for example, 35 of the participants, they were like aged less than 35 years old. So you need also to ensure how like the analysis has been undertaken. Also, the degree of error allowed by the researcher is also critically important in order to judge the accuracy of the research. So for example, let's say that there was a survey which stated that it's accurate or accuracy, it's within like plus or minus 10%, which indicates actually a high tolerance of error. So suppose the survey found that 65 or 64 of the population, they were like in favor of stricter political advertising regulations. So in reality, the true attitude of the population could be anywhere between 54% and 74% in favor of stricter control, which is a quite big difference. Also, researchers can have different interpretation based on their research philosophy or based on their research question or being insider or outsider researcher. Or maybe, and also this depends on the data analysis method that they apply. And this particularly more like relevant for a qualitative research. So you might have like different subjective interpretation. So maybe two researchers might actually interpret the same story, but having two different meanings. So before using any secondary data, please ensure to assess their quality and their accuracy based on what we discussed. So what I want you to do now is to go on Moodle discussion and reflection forum for Unit 2. Try to think if you will be focusing on secondary data only, or if you will be using mix of secondary data and primary data. And in all cases, I want you to think about what secondary data sources you might be using and where you might find these data, which database that you are willing to use. For example, do you want to go and will you MarketLine, for example? Will you having your research or data or statistics from certain government website? Tell us what are the data sets that you are planning to use and how might these like secondary data will be useful to answer your research question. And also we want you to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of using secondary data in your research. So please think about these, the answers for this question, and add your notes and answers to the discussion and reflection forum for Unit 2. So this is the end of our lecture. If you have any question, please post it on Moodle. In our next lecture, we will be looking at the primary data collection methods, and we will be focusing mainly on questionnaire. Thank you so much.